Greetings, welcome back to CS133 Practical Programming with Python. This is week 3. We're going over lists and functions. So today's lesson is how to write list. Our goal is to understand how to create and then access a list. As we go through the lesson, you'll understand what that means. But our success criteria, students will demonstrate creating a list and then setting it to a variable. And what does that mean? Well, a list is a type of variable, just like string variables, just like Boolean variables we went over, just like integers. It's just a type of variable which just happens to hold more than one item in it. And that's kind of the whole point of it. If you wanted to track all the users of your video game, you can't just create a variable every single time, because as a new user comes, your program's not going to be able to create the variable. So enter the list. Much like you take a shopping list or any other type of list, it's the same concept. The syntax you need to know is it's exactly the same as any other variable, but then you have these square brackets. And then each item is separated by a comma. Now these are string items, right? These are string items, but you can have Boolean items inside of here. You can have integers inside of here, as we'll go through. Just normally you'll see a lot of string items, so that's why you see the quotes in there. But the syntax is just the square brackets and then the commas between each of the items. Now, in order to access them, you need to call them by their index number. And it's important to understand a lot of programming languages are like this. The very first item, very first element, these are, official term is elements. The very first element is an index 0. Index 0. So it's the first element, but it's an index 0. And we'll see in a minute why that's important. So this is the second item, but it's an index 1. And this is the third item, but it's an index 2, right? And if you kind of remember back from our loops, and so I said this would come back real quick when we're in the loops, that there are 3 items in here. So if we loop, we do our for I in range 3, that will loop through all of them correctly. 0, 1, 2. So let's kind of look at the syntax to actually access it, right? How do you access item 0? So this square bracket, we call it bracket notation, is my list. If you just call my list, it's the whole entire thing. So by putting the bracket notation after my list, you can tell it which of those elements that you want. So 0 would be that first element. Now let's go ahead and look at this with code. So we have apple, grape, orange, and kiwi. So if we print fruit list 0, where 0 is that first element, it printed apple. Now if you wanted this item, it's the fourth element, but it is an index 0, 1, 2, 3, so that is why it printed kiwi. If we wanted orange, 0, 1, 2, so I'm going to change this to 2, run it again, and we get orange. So that's how you access it. Again, don't get too hung up on print. This is just like saying orange, right? With the quotes around it. That's how it's essentially a individual variable when you call it like that. Now, the next piece is I mentioned that you could, there are 4 items in here, so you could loop to 4, but there's a better way to do that. So another command that we're going to teach you is len. And then you put whatever you want to get the length of, so in this case a list, you put the list in there and it'll give you the length. And it'll just return it as a number at that exact spot. So it's kind of like having a variable that equals 6. But let's look at why this might be important. So we have fruit list equals our same list. Now we're going to get the length. And you don't have to do it this way. I'll show you a couple different ways, but for purposes of demonstration, I'm going to set it to a variable again, because I said whatever this is is just, in this case, is like saying 4. So, because there's 4. So we're going to get the length of fruit list. We're going to set it to a length. Another good reason to do this is if you need to use that length later on, then I don't need to use this whole thing. I can just use length later on. So for I in range length, remember, if you only have one item here, if you only have, this is essentially what it's saying, you only have one item there, it starts at 0 and it goes up to 3, which again, 0, 1, 2, 3. So when I print fruit list I, and I mentioned I was going to become important when we went over loops and fors, when I put I there, because if I put 0 there, right, that'll give us the first one, and I run it, it's just going to give me apple 4 times. It loops through the 4, because that's what the length is, there's 4, but 0 is always going to give that. I changes every single time. That's why I do this. Now, why do we length? What happens? Let's change this to 4 for now. But let's add one more. Banana. Banana. Alright, so I had a banana here. Let's run it. Banana is not showing up. Banana is not showing up. And that is because I hard-coded 4. However, if I get the length every single time, I can just keep adding items to this, and every time I run it, it will add the thing because it knows. So that is why you use this. Now I'll show you this real quick. You can also, and you'll probably see it this way more often than not. This is probably, but it does have a lot of parentheses, and I see a lot of students that will do this, and they're like, it's not working, and it's because you're missing one of your parentheses. So do realize sometimes I'll write it like this just so you can kind of see that a little bit better. That still works. But that's the concept of creating a list and then looping through it or accessing any individual one if you need to, and then being able to actually just loop through all of them and do stuff. You can use our if statement in here. If fruit list I, again, you gotta, whatever you're looking at it, equals grape, print grapelicious. I don't know how to spell that, but so if we run this, you can see whenever it's grape, it adds grapelicious. And you can have grape more often than not. Again, we're using fruits just to show you how it works, but any time that it's grape, it'll add that to the print as well. And that's about all there is to this. That is how you create a list, fill it, and next lesson we'll get into more details on how you manipulate, how do you add it programmatically later, i.e. ask a user for some items and then whatever they type in, it adds to the list for you. But that's next lesson, so we'll see you then.